Hi there. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create a basic form validation app using SwiftUI with the MVVM pattern and Combine. If you do not know what the MVVM pattern is or what Combine is, I have separate videos on these two topics, so make sure you watch them before you get to this tutorial. So the app we're going to build is going to look as follows. So we have a basic sign up screen, and initially you can see the continue button is disabled. But as soon as I start typing something, for example, the username and the password, now it will automatically start validating it and you will see the inline error. Currently the password is too weak, so let me pick something stronger. Now it is stronger now, however we haven't set the password again here, so they do not match yet. Now the passwords do match, and you can see as soon that condition holds, the continue button is also enabled. So if I would change the letter here, it would go back to disabled, and if I revert it, it's enabled again. So this is basically what we will build by the end of this tutorial. So without any further ado, let's get started. All right, now go ahead and create a new project in Xcode. Make sure you select app, press next, and give it some name. And make sure you select SwiftUI as your interface and the SwiftUI app as the lifecycle and Swift as your language. Press next and save it somewhere you like. Also make sure that you select the iPhone 11 as your simulator and try to resume the automatic preview. All right, now why don't we go ahead and start with the ViewModel. So what I will do here is I will create a class called form ViewModel, and it's going to be of type observable object. Now inside of this observable object, I will have a few published properties. So I will have a published variable called username, which is going to be a string. And we will have this 3 times for the password and also password again. Now we will also have another published variable called is valid, and this will be initially false. Now let's go into our content view and use this view model. So the way we do that is, for example, using the state object property wrapper, and we're going to declare it as a private variable form view model, like so. Now at this point we can also already start with the UI. So what we will do here is we will initially have a navigation view, and inside of this navigation view we will have a vertical stack, and inside of that vertical stack we will have a form and a button. All right, now the form will contain 2 sections, and each of these sections will have a header. So we'll start with the first one. The first one will have the header called username, and inside of that section for the username we will have a text field with the placeholder username. And here we have to provide the binding, and that's basically where whenever the user types something into the text field, we wanted to bind it to the ViewModel's username. So the way we do that is we have to use this dollar notation to access the binding, and then say form ViewModel dot username. Now there's one more thing we want to do here. We also want to make sure that the auto capitalization is set to none, because we do not want this for the username. Now we can do a similar thing again for the passwords. So let me just copy paste this in here and change this to password. And here I will have not a text field, but a secure field. So let me replace this with a secure field. And it's going to be password. And in this case, since it is a secure field, we do not really need this. And let me also copy this because we have to repeat the password. So I will name this one password again. Now, obviously, we do not want to bind it to the username. We want to bind it to the password and password again, like so. Now let's see how this looks like. All right, so we have our sections and the fields inside of it. Now the button is still missing because we haven't declared the view yet. So the way I'm going to do it is I will create a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 10, and I will set the frame height to 60, and I will also set an overlay, and inside of that overlay I will have a text, and it will basically say continue, and I will also give it a foreground color so we can see it of white. Now what I also want to do is I want to give this button a padding, and I want to make sure that the button is disabled when the ViewModel tells us that this form is not valid. So what I will do is I will go in here and say the button is disabled when the form ViewModel.isValid does not hold. So basically when the form is invalid, disable the button. Now we also want to give the navigation view a title, so I will just do it in here and simply say sign up. All right, that's really all there is to the UI. Now let's get to the combine part. Now as always, make sure you separate these. Now create a group called views and put your view inside of it, and also the same thing holds for the view model. This will be also in a separate file. Now since we need to use combine, I will also import combine. Now inside my ViewModel I can start to finally implement my publishers. So I will start by simply creating a publisher for checking whether my username is valid. So I will create a private variable called as username valid publisher, and it's going to be of type any publisher that will return a boolean and will never fail. Now in here I'm going to need to access the publisher. So if I would just simply write username, I would actually access the string. But if I wanted to access the actual publisher, I need to use the dollar notation and write username. And as you can see, it is a publisher, a published publisher that publishes a string. Now from this publisher, I'm going to debounce. So I will basically add a delay so this code is not executed too often. And this makes especially sense if you're doing networking. Then you also do not want to execute everything as fast as the user types. So it will run on the runLoop.main, and we want to also remove duplicates because we only care about the values that really are different. Now we also want to map. Remember what we get here is a string. The username publisher publishes a string. However, our username valid publisher has to publish a boolean. So what we will simply do is we will take that string and count it, and we want to make sure that it is greater or equal to 3. So the username should have at least 3 characters. And if we just leave it like this, Xcode will complain because the type what we actually have here is quite long. It contains this remove duplicates, it contains the debounce, and really you should define all of this in here, but we don't want to do this, and that's why we have this any publisher. And the way you can erase this really long type is simply by saying erase to any publisher. And that really simplifies a lot for you. Now for the username, we will only have this publisher, but for the password, we will have some more. So why don't we go ahead and just copy this and paste this down here. And I will rename this into is password empty publisher. And we will obviously not access the username, but the password. And we also want to debounce here, remove the duplicates, and the string that we get, so basically the password, we want to check whether it is empty, and that way we get a boolean, and then we also erase to any publisher. Now we need one more publisher for the password. Let me copy and paste this in here, and this time it's going to be our passwords equal publisher. Now for this one, we have to do something different. What we have to do is to call publishers dot combine by latest. Now there are multiple versions of it. There's combine latest 3 and 4. And if you actually want to combine 8, you have to probably take 2 combine latest 4 and then combine them together. So the combine latest is the equivalent of combine latest 2. So let me show you what I mean. So combine latest takes 2 publishers, A and B. And the publishers we're going to take is the password publisher and the password again publisher. And similar to above, we are also going to do a debounce, but with a slighter delay. And here we are going to do a map, and the $0 would relate to whatever the password publishes, and the $1 would relate to whatever the password again publishes. And what we want to check is whether what the password publishes is equal to whatever the password again publishes. And similar to the other example, we have to also say erase to any publisher. Now, lastly, we have to also check whether the password is strong enough. So let me create a private variable called is password strong publisher, which is going to be of type any publisher, going to return a boolean and never fail. Now what I will do in here is I will access the password publisher again, and I will also do a similar debounce as before in here. And after the debounce, I want to also remove duplicates, and then I want to do a map. And I could do a really basic one and simply say the count has to be greater than. So what I'm saying here is the password is strong enough if it contains at least 6 characters. And lastly, I have to do erase to any publisher. Now, this is totally fine. You can do it that way, but it would be nice to have some more fancy validation. So what I did was created this private static constant called predicate, which is basically an NS predicate. And what it basically does is it uses regular expressions to check whether the password contains any letter from A to Z, and whether it contains one of these special characters, and also whether it is at least of length 6. And the way you use this is you go down here, and instead of this, you will simply say self.predicate and then evaluate with the string. So basically what the password is. And that should give us a pretty nice validation, as you saw in the example at the beginning. Now what you will notice is that we have 3 publishers here and only 1 username publisher. So it would be nice if we had some kind of inline arrow telling us what kind of issue we have, whether the password is empty or whether the current issue is that the passwords are not equal, or whether the issue is that the password is not strong enough. So to separate these kind of issues, we will create an enum, and this will be considered a model. So you should also create a separate file for it. And I will simply call this one password status. And we will have multiple cases here. So we could have the case that it's empty. We could have the case that it's not strong enough. We could have the case that repeated password is wrong. And in the best case, we will have the case that it's valid. Now what we can do is we can create a publisher that basically takes all of these three publishers and instead of returning a Boolean, returns a password status that we can then use to provide the corresponding inline error. So let's do that. So I will create a private variable called is password valid publisher, and it will be of type any publisher. However, we won't return a Boolean, but we will return a password status, and the failure type is going to be also never. Now what we will do in here is we will take these three publishers, so we will have to use the publishers dot combine latest 3. Now here we can pass 3 publishers, and we are going to pass in all 3 password publishers. So we have the is password empty publisher, the is password strong publisher, and the are passwords equal publisher. Now we can map. And what we can do here is, remember $0 relates to the first one, $1 to the second, $2 to the third one. What we can do is we can say if $0 holds, so which would mean the password is empty, we would return the password status dot empty. Now you could move all of this into one line, like so. And we will do that for the other ones as well. We will say if $1, actually in this case, because we're checking if the password is strong, we have to negate it. We want to check whether it is not strong. And if it is not strong, we will return password status dot not strong enough. And then for the third one, if the passwords are not equal, we will return password status dot repeated password is wrong. However, if none of this is the case, we can return the valid case. So the password status dot valid, like so. And lastly, do not forget to say erase to any publisher, so it is not in conflict with the type declaration. Now we have a publisher that tells us whether the password is valid, and we have a publisher up here that checks whether the username is valid. Now it would be nice if we have another publisher that checks whether the form is valid, and the way we do that is by simply saying private variable is form valid publisher, and it's going to be a very simple one, similar to the ones before. It's going to publish a Boolean and never fail. And here we will do a basic publishers.combine latest. And we will simply take the is password valid publisher and the first one, the is username valid publisher. And then we're going to simply map. And for the password valid publisher, we have to check whether it is equal to valid. And for the other one, for the username, we simply have to check whether it is true. And we have to say erase to any publisher. Now what we have to do is we have to listen to this publisher. So basically we have to subscribe to this publisher and then set this is valid based on what the publisher returns us. And we can do that in the initializer. So I will create a basic initializer in here and I will call the is form valid publisher. And in here I will say receive on the main queue. And this is really important. The reason why we have to do that is since we're subscribing to it later on, and at some point it will update this published variable, right? And whenever this published variable is updated and published, the view is getting updated as well, because the view is observing this view model, and you never want to update the UI in the background queue. You want to do it in the main queue to not block the UI. Now I can say assign, which is our subscriber, and here I will simply use the key path notation is valid, and I will use the key path on self, which is the ViewModel. Now we have to also store it. However, we haven't declared any cancelable set. So let me do that quickly. So I will create a private variable cancelables, and it's going to be a set of any cancelable, like so. Now we can go down here and simply say store and pass in the cancelable set. Now this takes care of the form validation, but we still need the text for the inline errors, right? And for that we first of all need a published string variable again, and I will do it here. I will simply say published variable inline error for password, like so, and then go all the way down to the initializer again, and instead of subscribing to the is form valid publisher, this time we will subscribe to the is password valid publisher. Now remember, this is password valid publisher gives us this password status that we can use to set the corresponding text. Now what I want to do is initially, when this is initialized, I want to drop the first published value, because obviously initially the password check would simply fail because the user didn't enter anything, and I don't want to show the inline errors immediately. So I will drop the first one, and then I will say receive on the run loop.main, and then I will also do a map where I have access to my password status. Now I will do a switch on my password status. All right, now let's start with the first case. So in the case where the password is empty, we want to return password cannot be empty. And for the case not strong enough, we will simply say password is not strong or is too weak. And for the case the repeated password is wrong, I'll return passwords do not match. However, for the case where it is valid, we want to make sure that the string is reset to the empty string. We have to also make sure that we assign it to the variable we just created. It was called the inline error. inline arrow for password, which we will apply on the ViewModel, so self. And we have to also make sure that we store it in our cancelable set, like so. And that's really all there is to it. Now let's see if that works as expected. Let me run this and see. All right, so here I have the app running. So let me enter a name. And the button is still disabled. And when I enter something, we do not really see the inline arrows. And actually that makes sense because we forgot about that. We haven't updated our UI. Now, what we need to do is we have to make sure that this inline arrow for password is shown in the UI. And the way we do that is actually quite simple. Remember, we had this form and we had this section for the password. Password has a header, text, and it can also have a footer. And we will use this footer to pass it our form view model dot inline arrow for password. And we want that text to be of color red, so I will also give it a foreground color of red. Now I enter the same username again and then a password. Now you can see the password is too weak. Now the passwords do not match. And now it also matches and the button is enabled. All right, now this is really all I wanted to show you in this tutorial. I hope you were able to learn a bit about combining publishers and creating something more complex than what we had in our previous examples. Now, as always, make sure you subscribe to the channel and press the bell button so that you get notified when new content arrives. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial.